wind carried a scent he knew too well. Wild horse in trouble, thick with the tang of disturbed earth. Years had passed, stretching like the endless plains, but that familiar, almost mournful whinny, echoing from the shadowed ridge, stirred a memory deep in his bones. A ghost of a touch, a silent promise. He gripped the worn leather of his reins, his knuckles wide against the weathered hide. It couldn't be. Not after all this time, not after so many seasons had turned. Yet, a chill snaked down his spine, cold and insistent, a premonition that the past, untamed and powerful, had finally caught up with him. And it was leading a whole lot of chaos with it, straight to his doorstep. Dust motes, thick as a summer haze, danced in the morning light filtering through the barn door as John Red Miller watched his cattle graze. His ranch, tucked into the lazy, gentle curve of the Brazos River, was usually a picture of quiet peace, a symphony of contented lowing, the rhythmic clink of his bridle, and distant bird calls. Today, though, a different kind of sound hung in the air, a low thrum that vibrated in the soles of his boots, the thud of hooves, closer and louder than any stray could make. Red, a man whose life was built on routine and the predictable rhythms of the land, felt a prickle of unease rise on his forearms. His loyal German shepherd, Rusty, nudged his calloused hand, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest, mirroring Red's own unspoken tension. "Easy, boy," Red murmured, his voice a low rumble, his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanning the horizon, fixed on the shimmering heat waves. He'd seen plenty of wild horses in his day, magnificent, untamed creatures. But these last few weeks, the sightings had been too frequent, too bold. They weren't just passing through, seeking new pastures. They were tearing up fences with what seemed like malicious intent, scattering his cattle herds into a panicked frenzy, leaving a chaotic trail of broken land and agitated livestock that felt almost deliberate, almost personal. And then he saw them, a dozen powerful horses, their coats gleaming like polished obsidian in the harsh Texas sun, galloping hard across his north pasture, a swirling vortex of raw power. At the head of them, a magnificent stallion, black as a moonless night, his mane and tail flowing like smoke, a dark banner against the pale sky. A jolt, like a sudden electric current, went through Red, chilling him to the bone despite the rising heat. The way it moved, that powerful, almost arrogant stride, the proud arch of its neck, the single, stark white blaze on its forehead, like a star against the darkness. It was impossible, a trick of the light, a figment of his tired mind. Yet his heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in his chest. He'd known that horse once, a lifetime ago. It felt like saved it, even. But this wasn't the skittish, grateful colt he remembered, the one whose eyes held a quiet trust. This was a force of nature, untamed and destructive, a beautiful, terrifying storm. The stallion reared high, a silhouette against the endless sky, letting out a piercing, triumphant whinny that seemed to mock the very notion of order, of fences, of man's dominion. Red felt a cold, hard knot tighten in his gut. This wasn't just about protecting his ranch anymore, about lost profits or mended fences. It was personal. The calm, observant rancher in him wrestled with the rising storm of recognition, the echo of a long-buried memory. He had to stop them. But how do you stop a ghost from your past? A living, breathing testament to a forgotten bond. The uncertainty was a heavy cloak wrapping around him. The next few days blurred into a cycle of frustration, exhaustion, and mounting anger. The wild herd, a dark, relentless tide led by the black stallion, became bolder, more aggressive, their incursions more frequent and devastating. They weren't just passing through. They were actively harassing the ranchers, almost as if they were waging a deliberate war against the settled land. Red spent his mornings under the scorching sun, his hands raw from mending fences that seemed to crumble as fast as he could repair them. His afternoons were spent chasing shadows, hazing the elusive herd further into the dry, unforgetting canyons, only for them to reappear, defiant, at dusk. His nights were a torment, punctuated by the distant, unsettling whinnies that seemed to carry a mocking edge on the wind. Sleep became a luxury he couldn't afford, his dreams haunted by the thunder of hooves. One scorching afternoon, the air thick with dust and the smell of parched earth. While repairing a section of fence near a treacherous ravine that dropped sharply into a jagged crevice, Red encountered Jebediah Jebstone, a neighboring rancher. Jeb, a man whose face was as weathered and seamed as old saddle leather, was slumped against his horse, a gaunt, defeated figure, his hat pulled low, shielding his eyes from the glare. "They hit me again, Red," he rasped, his voice hoarse, dry as the dust around them, brittle with exhaustion and despair. "Tore through my south pasture like a damn whirlwind. Lost 3 calves to the fall, straight into that gully. This ain't just bad luck. It's a plague, a curse on our land." Red nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the broken, twisted wire, a symbol of their helplessness. "I know, Jeb. I've been seeing it too. That black stallion, he's the ringleader, the one pushing them on." He didn't say the name that echoed in his head, the name he'd given a long-ago colt. Jeb spat a stream of dark tobacco juice onto the dusty ground, a small, dark stain spreading. "That devil horse. Some folks over in town are saying it's got a mean spirit, a vendetta against us settlers. Others whisper about a ghost from an old legend, a horse spirit come back to claim the land, to drive us out." He paused, his eyes, bloodshot and weary, narrowing as he looked at Red. "You got any ideas, Red? 'Cause I'm about out of them." "Talk around the county is getting ugly, Red. Folks are talking about getting their rifles, rounding up every man, and shooting them down, every last one, to end this." The words hit Red like a physical blow, a punch to the gut. Shoot them down. His mind, despite his efforts, flashed back to a younger, smaller version of that powerful black horse, to days of gentle nuzzles and soft whinnies. He looked at Jeb, at the raw desperation etched on his face, at the fear in his eyes. "There's gotta be another way, Jeb," Red said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, but firm with conviction. "Trapping them, maybe, or hazing them further north into the federal preserve. A place where they can truly be wild." Jeb, a dry, humorless sound. "Tried that, Red. They just circle back like a river finding its old course. That black one, he's too smart. He knows our moves before we even make him." The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive, punctuated only by the distant call of a crow, a mournful sound under the vast sky. Red felt the immense weight of the community's fear and anger pressing down on him, a crushing burden. He was losing control of the situation, the rancher's practical solutions failing. And worse, he felt himself losing time. Time to find a solution that didn't involve violence. Time to save the horse that haunted his memories, the one that held a piece of his past. He felt a cold dread creeping in, a tightening in his chest. His rancher's instincts were telling him one thing, to protect his livelihood, but his heart, burdened by the ghosts of the past, was pulling him in another, agonizing direction. The chasm between duty and loyalty seemed to widen with every passing hour. The moon, a great luminous disk, hung low and full in the inky sky, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the ranch yard. Red sat on his porch swing, the familiar rhythmic creak of the old wood a small, familiar comfort against the churning turmoil in his mind. The conversation with Jeb replayed in his head, a relentless loop, the grim determination in Jeb's voice echoing the growing sentiment in the county. Shoot them down. Eradicate them. The thought was a raw, festering wound, tearing at the very fabric of his loyalty, his humanity. Suddenly, unbidden and vivid, an image flashed before his eyes, sharp and clear as if it were happening now. A ferocious summer storm years. Above the sky, a bruised, angry purple lightning splitting ancient gnarled oaks with blinding flashes and deafening cracks. He was younger then, just starting out, barely more than a boy, a greenhorn trying to prove himself to the unforgiving land. He'd been out checking fences, his oilskins plastered to his skin, when he'd stumbled upon it, a colt, no more than a few months old, a tiny, shivering bundle of black fur, trapped in a tangled, inescapable mess of fallen branches, its small leg twisted at a natural, horrifying angle. The storm raged around them, a furious tempest, but the colt's desperate, high-pitched cries cut through the wind and thunder, piercing his very soul. He remembered the bone-deep cold, the biting, relentless rain that stung his face. He remembered the wild, raw fear in the colt's wide, dark eyes, reflecting the flashes of lightning. He spent hours soaked to the bone, his fingers numb, carefully, painstakingly freeing the trapped leg, talking to the frightened animal in a low, soothing, almost whispered voice, a constant murmur against the storm's roar. He'd carried the shivering, trembling colt back to his small, drafty barn, built a makeshift splint out of old wood and strips of cloth, and nursed it through the long, terrifying night, never leaving its side. He'd named him Shadow, for the way his black coat seemed to absorb all the light, a silent, fitting name. For weeks, Shadow had been his constant companion, a small, dark shadow indeed, following him like a loyal dog, limping on his mending leg. When the colt was strong enough, truly healed, Red had led him to the edge of the vast, wild wilderness, a place where no fence could ever hold him. He'd watched him disappear into the soaring, untamed land, a silent promise hanging in the crisp air that he would always, truly, be free. The memory was so potent, so real, Red could almost feel the colt's soft muzzle against his hand, the warm, gentle breath. Now, that same spirit, grown into a powerful, destructive stallion, was a menace, a symbol of ruin to his neighbors and his way of life. The thought of raising a rifle to that magnificent creature, the one he had saved, nurtured, set free, made his stomach clench, a knot of nausea. He gripped the arms of the swing, his knuckles white, his breath tight in his chest. The old barn, barely visible in the moonlight, seemed to loom in the darkness, a silent, weathered witness to his past, to his impossible choice. He could almost hear Shadow's soft whinnies from those long-ago nights, echoing in the stillness. The rational part of him, the rancher whose livelihood, whose very survival, was under threat, screamed for immediate, decisive action, for duty to his community. But his heart, burdened by that unspoken bond, by the echoes of a promise made in a storm, whispered of a different path, a desperate, illogical hope. The wilderness, once a symbol of glorious freedom for Shadow, now represented a harsh, impossible crossroads for Red. He had to choose, protect his home and his neighbors, or honor the memory of a horse that never forgot, a horse that had inexplicably come back. The decision weighed on Red like a saddle loaded with bricks, each pound a crushing burden. He'd spent the last few days in a torment of agonizing indecision, the hours bleeding into one another. But the rancher's growing desperation, their quiet threats, had forced his hand. He would try to capture Shadow, to gentle him, to lead him away, but never to kill him. It was a long shot, a gamble with his own life, a dangerous, perhaps foolish endeavor, but it was the only path his conscience, scarred by memory, would allow him to take. He rode out at dawn, the air still crisp with the promise of a new, uncertain day, yet heavy with the impending confrontation. His lariat was coiled tight and ready at his saddle horn. His trusty rifle was in its worn leather sheath, but he prayed, with every beat of his weary heart, that he wouldn't have to use it. Rusty trotted faithfully beside him, his ears perked, a silent, loyal companion. Red tracked the herd's fresh signs for hours, following the unmistakable trail deeper and deeper into the rugged, unforgiving terrain where the canyons twisted and turned like knotted rope, a labyrinth of rock and shadow. Finally, he spotted them. The black stallion, unmistakable, a dark king against the pale rock, stood atop a rocky outcrop, surveying his domain. His herd spread out below him, restless and powerful, a living wave of muscle and wildness. Red dismounted slowly, carefully, his movements deliberate, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and fear. He approached cautiously, his eyes sharp and unwavering, never leaving shadow. The stallion's ears swiveled, acknowledging his presence, a slight twitch, but there was no fear in those dark, intelligent eyes, only a wary intelligence, a challenge. "Shadow," Red called out, his voice hoarse, dry from the dust and the tension. "It's me, boy, Red." The stallion pawed the ground once, twice, a low rumble echoing in his chest. It was a challenge, a warning, a rumble of ancient power. Red continued to advance, slowly, holding his hands open, empty, a gesture of peace. "I don't want to hurt you, fella," he murmured, his voice soft, coaxing. "You gotta stop this, though. You're tearing up everything, breaking good men." Suddenly, with a breathtaking surge of power, Shadow charged, not at Red, but at his own herd, driving them forward. A black arrow aimed straight towards a narrow, shadowed canyon. It was a trap, a brilliant, terrifying maneuver. Red cursed, a bitter taste in his mouth, realizing the stallion had outsmarted him, using his presence, his perceived threat, to funnel the herd into an escape route, a place where Red would be at a disadvantage. Red mounted quickly, spurred his horse, galloping hard, desperate to cut them off, to head them away from the treacherous canyon entrance. The ground thundered beneath his horse's hooves, the dust blinding him, stinging his eyes. He pushed his horse to its absolute limit, calling upon every ounce of strength and will. But Shadow, fueled by wild instinct and desperate cunning, was faster, a blur of dark motion. The relentless Texas sun beat down, a blazing inferno in the vast empty sky, as Red slowly, agonizingly, pushed himself up from the hard-packed earth, his head swimming with dizziness and pain. Rusty whined, a low, mournful sound, nudging his injured hand with his wet nose, a worried presence in the sudden, overwhelming silence. The dust had settled, thick and heavy, clinging to everything, and the thundering hooves had faded into an echo, leaving only the maddening, high-pitched buzzing of flies to disturb the oppressive stillness. Red's left arm was twisted at an odd, unnatural angle, a searing pain shooting up to his shoulder, and a jagged, bleeding cut ran from his temple down his cheek, blood trickling into his eye. He was alone, miles from his ranch, deep in the wild, and the immense weight of his failure pressed down on him, a crushing, physical burden. The familiar, comforting vastness of the plains, once a source of solace, now felt like an endless, lonely expanse, a desolate prison. He managed, through sheer grit and a grimace of pain, to get back on his horse, every movement sending a fresh jolt of agony through his battered body. He rode slow, his vision blurred, his mind replaying the confrontation, the cunning, almost human intelligence in Shadow's dark eyes. It was clear now. Capture was out of the question. He'd utterly underestimated the raw, untamed wildness, the fierce, unyielding spirit that had taken root and flourished in the stallion, turning him into a true king of the wild. What then? The choice, once a difficult moral dilemma, now seemed stark, brutal, and unavoidable. As he rode, his eyes, despite the pain, constantly scanned the parched landscape. And then he saw it again in the distance, a glimmer of stark white amongst the muted green of the sagebrush. It was a single bleached bone, a femur from a calf, picked clean by scavengers, stark against the dusty earth. He'd seen plenty of those lately, grim, stark reminders of the herd's relentless destruction, their desperate need for food and territory. But this one was different. It lay near a cluster of ancient, twisted mesquite trees, their branches gnarled and contorted. Trees that had been there since before his grandfather's time, old as the land itself. Trees that had been there that day, all those years ago, when he'd found the injured, frightened colt. The very spot. A jolt went through him, sharper than any physical pain. A sudden clarity amidst the fog of his injuries. Not just because of the memory, so vivid and haunting, but because of a new, startling realization. The herd wasn't just aimlessly rampaging, their movements random. They were returning to a specific area, over and over again, like an animal circling its wounded prey. This wasn't chaos. It was a deliberate pattern, a desperate, powerful search. The bone, once a mere symbol of loss, now became a crucial clue, a piece of a larger puzzle. It pointed to something else, something deeper, something he had overlooked. He felt a spark, a flicker of something he hadn't felt in days. An idea, a last desperate, audacious chance. It would be risky, maybe even foolhardy, given his injuries and a stallion's fierce intelligence, but it was the only way he could think of to avoid the ultimate, devastating decision, the one he swore he would never make. He would have to face Shadow again, but not with a lariat or a rifle. He would have to face him with something else entirely, something far more powerful than force. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the vast western sky in fiery hues of orange, purple, and crimson. But Red felt a cold, unyielding certainty settle in his chest. He was going to the very heart of the problem, to the source of the wild horse's desperation. And he was going with both courage and a deep, gnawing doubt, the two emotions warring within him. Red found the herd again the next morning, just as the first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky in soft, pale light. They were clustered near a hidden spring, a small oasis deep within the gnarled mesquite thicket, a place few men ever found. Shadow stood guard, a sentinel against the rising sun, his black coat shimmering like polished obsidian, majestic and wild. Red dismounted slowly, carefully, his injured arm throbbing, leaving Rusty tied to a tree, a silent promise to return. He carried nothing but the worn leather bridle, the one he'd kept all these years, the same one he'd used to gently lead Shadow when he was a frightened, injured colt. He approached slowly, deliberately, his movements soft, almost reverent. The only sound was the chirping of unseen crickets and the gentle murmur of the spring water. Shadow watched him, his head held high, his ears swiveling, a testament to his keen awareness. Red didn't speak, didn't make a sudden move. He simply walked, one foot in front of the other, slowly, deliberately, towards the magnificent stallion, his heart thrumming. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, dried apple, shriveled but sweet, something he always carried for his own horse, an offering of peace. He extended his hand palm up, just as he had all those years ago, a silent invitation, a forgotten language. Shadow snorted, his nostrils flaring, a puff of warm air. He took a single, hesitant step back, his muscles tensing, ready to bolt. The tension in the air was palpable, stretched taut and vibrating like a banjo string about to snap. Red didn't push. He just stood there, unmoving, the apple in his hand, a silent offering, a memory manifest. Minutes stretched into an eternity, marked only by the slow beating of his own heart. The other wild horses watched, restless but still, their eyes fixed on the man and the black stallion. Then, with a hesitant, almost imperceptible step, Shadow moved forward. He sniffed the apple, his soft, velvety muzzle brushing Red's palm, a familiar, comforting touch that sent a wave of raw emotion, of sorrow and profound connection through Red. He ate the apple, slowly, deliberately, his dark, intelligent eyes never leaving Red's face, searching, recognizing. It was a fragile truce, a sacred moment suspended between past and present, wildness and memory. Red then did something instinct, not reason, told him was right. He reached out, slowly, his hand moving with infinite care, and placed the worn leather bridle gently over Shadow's head. The stallion tensed, his powerful body vibrating with barely contained energy, but he did not resist. Red held the reins, not pulling, not forcing, but simply holding them, a connection, a shared tether, not a restraint. He then led Shadow not back towards his ranch, not towards fences or human civilization, but further into the untamed wilderness, deeper into the canyons towards the most remote, untouched part of the territory, a place where the wild horses would truly, finally, be safe from human interference, a true sanctuary. He showed him hidden springs, lush grazing lands tucked away in forgotten valleys, far from human settlements. He led him, not as a captor leading a prize, but as a guide, fulfilling the unspoken promise from all those years ago, a promise to freedom. He spurred his horse one last time, drawing level with the last of the mares, his arm outstretched, the lariat ready to fly. But just as he was about to release it, to attempt his desperate capture, Shadow swerved, a sudden, powerful cut, placing himself directly in front of Red's horse. Red's horse stumbled, thrown off balance, pitching Red violently and unexpectedly from the saddle. He hit the unforgiving ground hard. The wind knocked clean out of him in a guttural gasp, his head hitting a sharp rock with a sickening, jarring thud. Darkness swirled at the edges of his vision, a rapidly encroaching void. He lay there, dazed, a throbbing pain blooming behind his eyes as the wild horses thundered past, their hooves seeming to shake the very earth beneath him, a deafening roar. Shadow paused for a single agonizing moment, looking down at him, his dark eyes unreadable, a silent judgment. Then, with a defiant snort that carried on the wind, he turned and disappeared with his herd into the swirling dust, swallowed by the wild. Everything felt lost. His body ached with a dull, pervasive pain. His head throbbed, a relentless drumbeat. But the worst pain was in his gut, the pain of failure, of betrayal, of a bond broken beyond repair. The memory, once a source of hope, was now a bitter taste. He spent the next few days with the herd, a silent, almost invisible observer, a shadow himself. He watched Shadow lead, protect, and guide his mares and foals, a true king of the wild, a magnificent, responsible leader. Red understood now with a clarity that stung. The stallion hadn't been terrorizing ranchers out of malice or a vengeful spirit. He had been desperately searching for a new home, a safe haven, a true sanctuary for his growing herd, pushed from their traditional lands by encroaching civilization, by the ceaseless march of man. The old paths were gone, replaced by fences and farms. The destruction, the broken land, was a desperate act of a wild animal trying to survive, trying to find a home, not an act of vengeance. Red eventually rode back to his ranch, exhausted, his body aching, but lighter in his soul, a deep peace settling over him. The fences would still need mending. The ranchers would still be uneasy, but he had found a solution that didn't involve bloodshed, a path to coexistence. He had shown them a new way, a new territory where they could truly be free, unburdened by human presence. Nothing was exactly as it was before. The landscape had changed. The world was moving on, and Red, too, was transformed. He was still a rancher, still pragmatic, still rooted in the land, but now his heart held a deeper understanding of the wild, of the intricate balance of nature, and of the enduring, unbreakable bonds that can form between man and beast, bonds that transcended time and circumstance. As he dismounted at his dusty corral, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, casting long, silent shadows, he looked out at the vast open land, a land that held both promise and mystery. "Some things," he whispered, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips, the last rays of sun glinting in his tired eyes, "you just don't forget."